Beneath the vaulted ceilings of Madrid's royal palace, where the ghosts of Spain's imperial past linger in gilded halls and shadowed alcoves, a secret endures once so outlandish, so deeply human, that it has captivated the imagination of historians, courtiers, and gossips for over 2 centuries. Concealed behind crimson velvet curtains, far from the pomp of royal banquets and the gleam of jeweled crowns, lies a relic that defies the grandeur of monarchy, the preserved genitals of King Ferdinand VII, suspended in a glass jar of alcohol. This is no mere artifact of curiosity, no forgotten bauble of a bygone era. It is a grotesque emblem of a king's unraveling, a man so tormented by paranoia, cowardice, and an insatiable need to prove his masculinity that he plunged a once mighty empire into a maelstrom of betrayal, repression, and civil war. The story of the jar, whether truth or myth, is inseparable from the life of Ferdinand VII, a monarch whose insecurities shaped not only his reign, but the fate of Spain itself, leaving a legacy etched not in marble but in scandal and shame. Born on October 14, 1784, in the austere splendor of the El Escorial Palace, Ferdinand VII entered a world where Spain's golden age was a distant memory. The empire that had once spanned continents from the silver mines of Mexico to the spice routes of the Philippines was in steep decline. The Spanish Armada, a symbol of invincibility, had been crushed by Britain at Trafalgar in 1805. The royal treasury, bled dry by endless wars and colonial revolts, teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. Across the Pyrenees, Napoleon Bonaparte's France loomed as both ally and predator, its imperial ambitions threatening to swallow the Iberian Peninsula. In this precarious landscape, Ferdinand was an unlikely heir to the Bourbon throne. The son of King Charles IV and Queen Maria Louisa of Parma, he grew up in a court steeped in decadence and intrigue, where loyalty was fleeting and power was a game of shadows. Ferdinand's childhood was marked by isolation and resentment. A slight, nervous boy with a sallow complexion and wary eyes, he lacked the charisma or martial prowess expected of a Spanish prince. His father, Charles IV, was a genial but ineffectual monarch, more interested in hunting and clockmaking than governance. His mother, Maria Louisa, was a formidable figure, rumored to be entangled with Manuel Godoy, the ambitious prime minister who wielded outsized influence over the crown. Ferdinand despised them both, seeing in their rule a weakness that mirrored his own insecurities. By his teenage years, he was already plotting against them, his ambition fueled by a toxic blend of envy and fear. He surrounded himself with a clique of disaffected nobles, known as the Fernandinos, who fed his delusions of grandeur and stoked his hatred for Godoy and his parents. By his early 20s, Ferdinand's discontent had hardened into treachery. In 1807, at the age of 23, he orchestrated a conspiracy that would shock the Spanish court. Known as the Escorial Conspiracy, aimed to depose Charles IV and install Ferdinand as king. The plot was amateurish, betrayed by a disloyal servant, who revealed Ferdinand's plans to Godoy. When confronted, Ferdinand crumbled, weeping and begging for his parents' forgiveness while implicating his co-conspirators. The episode exposed his cowardice, but also his cunning. Though punished with house arrest, he emerged unscathed, his ambition undimmed. More dangerously, he began to see Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor, as a potential ally. In secret letters, Ferdinand pledged his loyalty to Napoleon, offering to serve as a puppet king in exchange for French support against his parents. This act of betrayal, cloaked in flattery and desperation, set the stage for a reign defined by disloyalty and opportunism. Ferdinand's scheming bore fruit in March 1808, when a popular uprising, the Mutiny of Aranjuez, forced Charles IV to abdicate in his son's favor. The revolt, sparked by outrage over Godoy's mismanagement and rumors of French interference, handed Ferdinand the throne at last. Crowned Ferdinand VII, he was hailed by the Spanish people as a liberator, a young king who would restore Spain's pride. But his reign lasted barely 2 months. Napoleon, ever the master strategist, saw Spain as a prize too valuable to leave in the hands of an untested prince. In April 1808, he summoned both Ferdinand and Charles IV to Bayonne, France, in a maneuver that would humiliate the Spanish monarchy. In a tense, theatrical confrontation, Napoleon played father against son, exploiting their mutual distrust. Charles IV renounced his claim to the throne, and Ferdinand, cowed by Napoleon's authority, surrendered the crown to the emperor's brother, Joseph Bonaparte, who was installed as Spain's puppet king. In exchange, Ferdinand was granted a life of exile in France, a generous pension, the Chateau de Valognes, and the trappings of a pampered aristocrat. From 1808 to 1814, while Spain descended into chaos, Ferdinand lived in gilded captivity. The Peninsular War, a brutal struggle between Spanish guerrillas and French occupiers, claimed countless lives and ravaged the countryside. Cities were sacked, villages burned, and thousands perished in a fight for independence. Yet Ferdinand, far from the bloodshed, seemed unperturbed. He dined with French nobles, attended lavish balls, and indulged in hobbies like music and painting. He wrote fawning letters to Napoleon, addressing him as "my father" and pledging eternal gratitude to the Spanish people who revered him. As a symbol of resistance, his behavior was a betrayal of unimaginable magnitude. He was no longer Il Decido, but Il Fell and the traitor king. It was during this exile that the first whispers about Ferdinand's personal inadequacies began to circulate. French diplomats, in coded dispatches, described him as delicate and effeminate, terms that carried a sting in the machismo-driven culture of European courts. More damning were the rumors about his virility or lack thereof. Courtiers speculated that Ferdinand might be physically incapable of fathering children, a devastating accusation for a monarch whose dynasty depended on a male heir. These whispers were not mere gossip. They struck at the core of Ferdinand's identity, feeding an insecurity that would define his later years. The French, ever adept at psychological warfare, may have encouraged these rumors to undermine his legitimacy. By the time Ferdinand returned to Spain in 1814, after Napoleon's defeat, the seeds of doubt had taken root, both in his own mind and in the courts of Europe. Ferdinand's return was met with rapturous celebration. Spain, exhausted by war and occupation, saw in him a chance for renewal. Crowds lined the streets, chanting his name and waving banners. They called him Il Decido, the desired one, believing he would heal the nation's wounds and restore its former glory. It was a delusion that would cost Spain dearly. Ferdinand had no intention of embracing reform or reconciliation. His years in exile had hardened his absolutist instincts, and he viewed the liberal ideals that had emerged during the war with contempt. In May 1814, he issued a decree that shattered Spain's hopes. He abolished the Constitution of 1812, a landmark document drafted by the Cadiz courts during his absence. The Constitution had introduced parliamentary governance, freedom of the press, and limits on royal power, ideas that represented Spain's tentative step toward modernity. Ferdinand declared it null and void, proclaiming that his authority came directly from God, not the people. What followed was a reign of terror that stunned even his allies. Ferdinand unleashed a wave of repression aimed at crushing liberalism and restoring the old order. Political opponents were arrested, tortured, or executed. Liberal leaders, many of whom had fought heroically against the French, were branded traitors and hunted down. The press was silenced, and the Inquisition, dormant during the war, was revived to root out dissent. Universities were purged of progressive thinkers, and public gatherings were banned. Spain, which had glimpsed the possibility of a freer future, was thrust back into the darkness of absolutism. Ferdinand's actions alienated his former supporters, turning hope into despair and unity into division. Yet it was in the private sphere that Ferdinand's deepest fears played out. His personal life became a public obsession, as his inability to produce an heir fueled gossip and political instability. He married 4 times, each union a desperate attempt to secure the Bourbon dynasty. His first wife, Maria Antonia of Naples, married in 1802, was a frail, intellectual princess who died childless in 1806 after 4 years of marriage. Court whispers suggested the marriage was never consummated, a rumor that cut Ferdinand to the core. His second wife, Maria Isabel of Braganza, married in 1816, was a vibrant, cultured woman who won the hearts of the Spanish people. She, too, failed to produce a living child, dying in 1818 during a miscarriage that claimed her life. The tragedy deepened Ferdinand's humiliation, as foreign ambassadors began to write openly of his deficiency. His third marriage, to Maria Josepha of Saxony in 1819, was equally barren. For 7 years, the couple endured a childless union, despite prayers, pilgrimages to holy shrines, and consultations with Europe's leading physicians. By the late 1820s, Ferdinand, now in his 40s, was a figure of ridicule across Europe. Satirical pamphlets in Madrid mocked his supposed impotence, while caricatures in Paris and London depicted him as a cuckolded king, unable to fulfill his royal duties. The rumors about Ferdinand's virility were more than personal, they were dynastic. Without a male heir, the Bourbon line faced extinction, and Spain risked a succession crisis that could ignite civil war. The king's health was deteriorating rapidly. Gout had swollen his joints, making movement agonizing. Kidney failure left him weak and lethargic. Suspected diabetes caused his weight to balloon, his once youthful features now bloated and haggard. His teeth, decayed by neglect, added to his sickly appearance. Yet his obsession with proving his masculinity grew ever more frantic. Royal archives, though heavily censored, preserve fragments of medical reports detailing his relentless pursuit of potency. He summoned physicians from across Europe, demanding remedies that ranged from the bizarre to the exotic. He ingested powders made from crushed rhinoceros horn, believed to enhance virility. He drank elixirs brewed from rare plants harvested in the jungles of South America, shipped at great expense from Spain's dwindling colonies. He experimented with aphrodisiacs, from ancient herbal concoctions to cutting-edge chemical compounds, in a futile quest for validation. Every political slight, every whispered joke, he interpreted as an attack on his manhood, and his response was to lash out with increasing cruelty. In 1829, at the age of 45, Ferdinand made a final, desperate bid to secure his legacy. He married his niece, Maria Cristina of Bourbon, woman 23 years his junior. The match was not born of affection, but of political necessity. Maria Cristina, a vivacious and pragmatic princess, understood her role to produce an heir and avert a succession crisis. To the astonishment of the court, she became pregnant almost immediately. In October 1830, she gave birth to a daughter, Isabella, followed by another daughter, Luisa Fernanda, in January 1832. The births should have been a triumph, proof of Ferdinand's virility at last, but they were not. The children were girls, and in the eyes of Spain's conservative Carlist faction, only a male heir could legitimately inherit the throne. The Salic law, which barred women from the succession, had been repealed by Ferdinand in 1830 to ensure Isabella's claim, but this only inflamed tensions. The Carlists, led by Ferdinand's brother Don Carlos, viewed the repeal as a betrayal of tradition. Old rumors resurfaced with venom. Were the princesses truly Ferdinand's? Had Maria Cristina taken a lover to secure the succession? Some even whispered of medical interventions, artificial insemination, a radical and controversial idea for the time. Far from silencing his critics, the births deepened Ferdinand's humiliation, driving him further into paranoia. Ferdinand's final years were a descent into madness. His obsession with his masculinity became all-consuming, overshadowing his duties as king. He saw every criticism, political or personal, as an assault on his manhood. His temper, once petulant, became volatile, swinging between morose silence and explosive rage. He ordered the exile or execution of anyone suspected of disloyalty, real or imagined. Spain, already battered by years of war and repression, grew exhausted by its king's erratic behavior. The nation no longer feared him, they pitied him, a monarch unraveling in public, consumed by fears that history would remember him not as a ruler, but as a failure. By 1833, Ferdinand's body was betraying him in ways even his paranoia could not ignore. Gout had rendered him nearly immobile, his swollen limbs throbbing with pain. Kidney failure left him frail and disoriented, his once sharp mind clouded by illness. Suspected diabetes caused his weight to balloon, his face now a grotesque caricature of the young prince he had been. His teeth, rotted by neglect and poor health, made eating a torment. Yet even as death approached, his fixation on virility intensified. Bedridden and feverish, he demanded daily reports from his physicians about his reproductive health. He spoke of producing more heirs, as if time could be persuaded by sheer will. He ordered new treatments, potions, powders, and experimental remedies in a delusional bid to reclaim his potency. His court, once loyal, now watched in grim silence as their king spiraled into madness. It was in this final, desperate moment that Ferdinand issued the order that would cement his place in history, not as a monarch, but as a figure of grotesque fascination. According to accounts preserved in obscure royal archives, scrawled in private letters, and whispered in palace gossip, Ferdinand demanded that upon his death, his genitals be preserved in alcohol. The reasons remain a matter of conjecture. Some historians argue it was a defiant gesture, a way to prove to posterity that he was a true man, despite the rumors. Others see it as the product of a mind broken by years of ridicule and insecurity. Still, others suggest it was a morbid attempt to control his legacy, to ensure that history would remember him not as impotent, but as potent. Whatever the motive, the order was reportedly carried out. On September 29, 1833, after Ferdinand's death, palace servants, under strict secrecy, removed the organ and placed it in a glass jar filled with alcohol. The relic was hidden away, perhaps in a crypt beneath the royal palace, among forgotten treasures and relics of Spain's imperial past. No official inventory lists it, no plaque marks its resting place. Yet the story persisted, passed down through generations of courtiers, recorded in cautious diplomatic correspondence, and even claimed to have been seen by a few who ventured into the palace's hidden vaults. Ferdinand's death did not bring peace to Spain, it unleashed chaos. With no surviving sons, the throne passed to his 3-year-old daughter Isabella II, but the succession was contested by Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos, who insisted that only a male could rule. This dispute ignited the First Carlist War, a brutal conflict that tore Spain apart for 7 years and sowed the seeds for decades of further strife. The war was not just a battle over the throne, but a clash of ideologies. The absolutist Carlists, who championed tradition and divine right monarchy, against the liberal supporters of Isabella and her mother, Maria Cristina, who sought a constitutional government. The conflict ravaged Spain, leaving tens of thousands dead and entire regions in ruins. Ferdinand's failure to secure a male heir, despite his lifelong obsession with virility, ensured that his legacy was one of division and bloodshed. The irony was stark. A king who had spent his life trying to prove his masculinity left behind a fractured nation, plunged into chaos by the very question of succession he had failed to resolve. The story of the jar, whether true or apocryphal, became a symbol of Ferdinand's reign, a reign defined not by triumphs but by shame. It was repeated in aristocratic salons across Europe, where it was treated as both scandal and metaphor. Satirists in France and Britain seized on it, publishing caricatures that depicted Ferdinand as a bloated, insecure figure, clutching a jar that mocked both his manhood and his monarchy. In Spain, the tale was whispered with a mix of embarrassment and fascination, a reminder of how far the crown had fallen. Historians, too, grappled with Ferdinand's legacy. Official portraits painted him in regal splendor, adorned with crowns, scepters, and ermine robes. But these images rang hollow. The real Ferdinand was no hero. He was a man who had betrayed his father, surrendered his throne to Napoleon, crushed his nation's hopes for reform, and obsessed over his personal inadequacies. While his empire crumbled, the Carlist Wars dragged on, bleeding Spain dry. The monarchy, weakened by Ferdinand's erratic rule, struggled to maintain legitimacy. Isabella II, raised in a court poisoned by intrigue and factionalism, faced constant challenges to her authority. Her reign was marked by corruption, political instability, and further loss of Spain's colonial empire. The nation remained fractured, its once vast dominion reduced to a few outposts in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Ferdinand's name, far from inspiring pride, became synonymous with failure. He was not commemorated with grand monuments or celebrated in national lore. Instead, his reign was remembered as an era of betrayal, repression, and national humiliation, a cautionary tale of a king who valued ego over duty, proof over honor. 2 centuries later, the story of the jar endures, a haunting footnote in Spain's history. Modern historians debate its veracity. Some dismiss it as palace gossip, a legend born of ridicule and exaggeration, designed to mock a despised king. Others point to the tantalizing gaps in the official records, the cryptic references in private letters, and the persistent whispers that suggest it might be true. Archival documents from the period are frustratingly vague, with oblique mentions of private relics and royal instructions that hint at something extraordinary. A few 19th century accounts, written by diplomats and courtiers, claim to have seen the jar in a hidden chamber beneath the royal palace, nestled among forgotten relics of Spain's imperial past. Whether the jar exists, sealed in some forgotten crypt, is almost beside the point. Its power lies in what it reveals about Ferdinand VII, a man so tormented by his own inadequacies that he sought to preserve, in death, the one thing he feared to find him in life. Ferdinand's legacy is one of squandered potential. Spain, which had endured centuries of war, conquest, and empire, deserved a king who could lead it into renewal. Instead, it got Ferdinand a monarch consumed by fear, not of his enemies, but of himself. His obsession with virility did not protect his throne. It ignited a war. His daughters ruled, but under siege, their legitimacy forever questioned. His empire, once the envy of Europe, shrank into turmoil, its colonies slipping away one by one. His memory, far from golden, is etched in a whispered, grotesque relic of a king who could not master himself, let alone his kingdom. Somewhere, in the depths of Madrid's royal palace, they say, a jar remains sealed, suspended, forgotten, but never entirely. And whether it holds truth or myth, one thing is certain: no other king in Europe left behind something so human, so fragile, and so tragically revealing. A body may die, an empire may fall, but shame lasts forever.